people are going to get screwed. I feel like some tenants may get screwed. I feel like some landlords may get screwed. Not the best idea, and I think that there's a better alternative that we just have not quite discussed yet. I bet you probably didn't even realize that 2/3 of New York City is probably gonna hate what I'm about to tell you next. Broker's fees, part of the process of moving that nobody seemingly understands except for the brokers themselves. And that is what this video is all about, showing you exactly what a broker's fee is, all of the regulations that are being presented and how they would change the way those broker's fees would work, and some reasons as to why I believe that would be a terrible thing for the city if this new bill was to actually be passed. All right. What's up guys, Everett here from the present when I'm actually posting this video. The me that you're watching here with the longer hair and whatnot, that is me from the past, over a year ago, sharing what I thought would be in place when this bill actually went into law. The F.A.R.E. Act has officially went into law, so now we are going to watch what I previously recorded and never posted and see how much it lines up to what is actually happening and some of the issues that have come up more immediately from this bill being set into law. A lot of the stuff that I anticipated is pretty spot on and pretty accurate. That's what I'm here for. I won't interrupt too much. Back to the video, and I'll see you soon. On top of the security and first month's rent, it's usually about 8 to 15% of the annual year's rent, and that comes out anywhere to a month and a half. That covers the services for the broker that is showing the apartment. If there are two agents, maybe there's an agent that found an apartment on a tenant's behalf, that amount is split between the two parties, the tenant's broker and the listing broker. So that's officially one of the first things that is no longer true. If you do have a tenant's broker and a listing broker, they are now going to each get paid separately on two separate agreements that have nothing to do with each other. That's the biggest change of the law. If that tenant is paying 15%, it is just going to the broker that is working on their behalf. As a licensed real estate agent and as someone who represents a lot of landlords, I completely understand why a lot of people might be upset when it comes to having to pay an additional broker's fee to move into an apartment. In cases where that broker just seemed like a glorified door opener, collect your money and tell you to have a nice life. There is a lot of different aspects going back and forth that are involved in the process. It's not just the paperwork, it is the understanding of the laws. It's to make sure that the landlord themselves is not breaking or messing with any of the laws so that you are protected as a tenant, making sure that the tenants that we're screening are qualified for the units that they're going to be living in. At the end of the day, when you're a landlord, the best case scenario for you is to have 0 calls or texts or emails, because that means usually everything is running perfectly fine. And that is the best case scenario for any person who owns property that is renting it out. So I want to make a point here because I glanced really briefly over the application process and how involved it could potentially be, especially depending on if you're applying to condos or co-ops, which make up a lot of the buildings here in New York City. The application package when you're applying for a rental, it can be as simple as just a couple of forms, or in the case where you're looking at co-op buildings, there is much more documents and paperwork and information that need to be presented for the board and the owner to determine whether or not you're going to be a good fit for the building. That process alone, if you are not working with an agent, can be super frustrating. If you miss anything, it could cost you all the time and all of the energy and all of the money that you potentially spent on your board package, to the point where there's no recourse for it. If you get denied for an application for a rental for one of these co-ops or condos, you don't get a second chance. And so imagine if you are in a little bit of a rush, or this is your first time moving into the city and no one wants to waste time. Choosing to work with an agent as a tenant, in this case, that tenant's broker will be able to assist you with the board package to the highest level. That's not to say that the listing agent won't help you, but one of the challenges that's posed when a listing agent, and because I work a lot for landlords, I'm gonna just express myself as one, you have to go and do double work now if the tenant isn't being represented on one of those co-op packages. So just to make sure that all of your details are correct and all of the information is satisfactory, set up to the way the board is going to be approving it, all these extra that working with a broker can help you mitigate as much as possible. And that's not to say every agent, every tenant's agent is going to be a board package master, but I'm telling you as a listing agent, if you come to me with a tenant's agent to help you with the board package versus me having to make sure that you did everything right and you're not even my client, I'm doing double work for lesser amount of money. All that to say, don't underestimate the benefit of working with a tenant's agent when applying to apartments. A lot of people are going to be super excited that they no longer have to pay a broker's fee if they're not working with a broker. To me, it's better to have that peace of mind to know that it's getting approved with the help of that tenant's agent, especially in cases when that tenant broker knows the building. They know exactly what to do. They've done it before. There are ways to find out what buildings agents have worked in, but I digress. Fast forward to 2024. For the sake of the story, obviously it's a rewind. We have a council member here in Brooklyn who is pushing essentially keep tenants brokers being paid by tenants and landlord brokers being paid by landlords. Right now, if you were to move in New York City, let's just choose a $3,000 apartment, you would probably be paying a first month's rent, a security deposit, and some kind of broker's fee. $9,000 or $10,500. I know how to do that. And that's me talking in the past. That's how it used to be. So from a tenant's perspective, if you can eliminate that extra amount of money and only have to worry about your first month's rent and security deposit, that sounds incredible. There is one other reason that I think it would help, keeping a sense of delineation of who is working for who in a rental transaction. Sometimes when you walk into an apartment, you see the agent that is sitting there on their behalf of maybe the landlord. If they're doing their job right, they're presenting you with a agency disclosure form that tells you that they're working for the landlord. But sometimes they're not working for the landlord. Sometimes they are just representing multiple apartments, or sometimes they want to represent you on your behalf for this unit, for this apartment that they are showing for you. So it is very key to ask when you are meeting with an agent, if this is the first time you're meeting with an agent, who do you represent in this transaction? That can help you avoid any other confusion later on down the line as this new law comes into play, if this bill becomes a law. What we would see is that you would clearly have a tenant's broker who is clearly working on your behalf, that you would have to sign something ahead of time to confirm that they're working on your behalf for you. Separately, on the landlord side, they would always, if they're showing you the apartment without another agent being present, they would most likely always be representing the landlord and getting paid by the landlord to show this apartment, which in theory sounds quite nice, right? Now you know who's representing who in each transaction, and you don't have to pay an extra month and a half up front to actually move to that apartment in the first place. And that is exactly what's happening right now. So it has officially been set into action. And if you were to go and move to a new unit in New York City right now, all of the fees should be all listed in the description for anything that you could potentially be paying before actually living in the space. And on top of that, yes, all landlords, agents representing the apartments will have signed agreements with their landlords, and they cannot request an additional fee from you specifically towards their compensation, a broker's fee, in order to rent out the apartment. So my thought, and again, I'm not saying that I have a crystal ball, but if you are a landlord who is now essentially losing a month's worth of rent, not actually, but quite technically yes, because you have to compensate your agent, you might feel a certain type of way about that, especially if you don't have a great agent like me to represent you on your behalf. Instead of eating the cost of what would be $3,000, you're probably going to incorporate that $3,000 into the monthly rent. And so instead of paying $6,000, you're gonna be easily spending $6,500, $3,250 for your first month, $3,250 for your deposit, which is a wash at the end of the year because you're gonna be spending the same amount. What makes this extra bad for the short term, just 1 year. All it takes is 1 year. And not only are you washed out from the savings that you would have gotten, but now you are extra screwed because your rent is now being raised from that higher base price. So instead of going maybe up $100 from $3,000, you're spending $3,100. Now it's going up to $3,350. And that is your new monthly rent in the next year if it was to only go up by 100. Imagine if it's going up by a flat percentage amount, like 5%, you're just going 5% of the higher base price, which means you're ultimately paying more at the end of just the first year. The first year in 1 month, you're already spent more than what you would have spent if you had paid a broker's fee up front. I think it is not the best idea, and I think that there's a better alternative that we just have not quite discussed yet. If you aren't convinced from this point that this isn't a bad idea right now, here's one more reason why I think it's just gonna be terrible. To all my tenants out there, the last time you reached out to your landlord, how responsive was that landlord that you reached out to? Chances are, if they're like most landlords in New York City, they were not responsive in the first 10 minutes or hour, or potentially 2 hours of the message that you sent. And most likely it's probably 24 to 48 hours, again, if you have an attentive building. Now, some landlords might just say, you know what, I'm just gonna rent this out myself. I have time, I have energy, I have experience, and then we have more landlords taking this into their own hands, which means your scheduling, if you're a tenant, is going to be much more difficult because you're now dealing directly with the owner who might have a full-time job, who might be doing other things on the side, who may not be showing on Saturdays, who may not be aware of all of the laws and regulations that are in place that would potentially keep them from doing something that maybe you have no idea about because you don't know about the laws and regulations and you thought you were just gonna get a deal by renting directly from the landlord. You're just going to have more people who are feeling more empowered to take on this process themselves. And when people aren't renting out property on the regular basis, you could see how that could potentially cause some issues down the line. And a lot of what I just expressed is exactly what happened. The day June 11th came around, a lot of the apartments were completely taken off the market, probably because those owners and agents had to renegotiate, or probably a lot of agents got fired straight up for owners not wanting to pay additional fees. On top of that, we also saw rents hike in price immediately, 8 to 13% across the board. That's day one of implementation after this law. Let's imagine a few months, even years down the line, and that's only gonna escalate. People are going to get screwed. I feel like some tenants may get screwed. I feel like some landlords may get screwed for that reason, just because they don't have that additional representation that would let them know something that they probably didn't know. You now know what broker's fees are. You now know why this new regulation is implemented. You now know my opinion on why I think this regulation is a bad idea. If you're watching this video for the first time, I bet you probably didn't even realize that these commissions are negotiable. So if you go to an apartment that's $3,000, you could potentially say to the broker, like, hey, I really love this apartment. I want to move in and submit an application. Can we lower the broker's fee? Can we maybe implement the broker's fee over time so that I can lessen my burden, because it is really expensive for me to move and I don't want to spend that money up front. I would be happy to pay more a little bit if that's what it took. I could always ask the owner, you know what? I'm so glad you asked. Let me check. Let me see. Maybe I want to get it done. Maybe the apartment's been on for a little bit of time, and maybe it's in my best interest to have the owner cover some of that fee or to reduce it myself for the sake of just getting it done. But if this regulation goes into play, none of us are gonna be able to have that conversation anymore. I've been able to work with some tenants in the past and get them some really great options, lower their monthly rent or get a 2-year lease. There are different things that we can negotiate now that if this regulation goes into play, you can only negotiate around price basically at that point. And yes, like I said, it passed. So here are your options. You either negotiate on the price monthly that you're ultimately gonna spend, or you don't negotiate at all because you really don't have much of anything else to negotiate with. I mean, legally speaking, you don't have options to negotiate with, but I mean, I guess you could potentially work something out off the books with your landlord, but that's opening the door to a potential problematic situation down the line if there's anything else that your owner wants to do that's potentially off the books. Just like it is a law that the tenant cannot pay more than a month's security in order to lock in an apartment, and I'm just going off on a tangent now, because people make decisions without conferring all of the groups involved. And we have a serious issue right now, not just in politics, but in the way that business is being perceived and the way that stuff is getting done. And I wanna make sure that I'm showing up as often as possible to make sure that it is as easy to understand for you guys as possible. So if you watched all of this video today and you're still a little bit confused, please reach out to me in the comments. I would love to discuss exactly how these broker fees should, or maybe a better alternative of how we can do it. So this is one of the last few times I'm gonna be popping up in this video. I know, you're probably sad about it, but I just wanna point out just a couple of things that I didn't bring up at all in this video. And number one is that this affects rent regulated and rent stabilized apartments a little bit differently. Now, what I mean by that is when it comes to rent regulated and stabilized units, what you may have seen in the past is a broker charging an exorbitant extra broker's fee for these units, because these units are so rare when they come up and they're so desirable when they come out, because anything that is rent regulated or rent stabilized, they don't have the ability to adjust pricing. And the only way to actually make money on a unit as such is to collect the money in the form of a broker fee, and then to use that broker's fee eventually to pay the owner or repay the owner. And then we saw that a couple years ago, there was a $20,000 broker's fee that people were paying for a rent regulated unit. You'll never see that again, which is the good news. The bad news is for any owners that have rent regulated buildings who were already being negatively affected by the Housing and Tenant Protection Act. Earlier this year, we had good cause evictions. So anyone with 10 or more units is already being forced to give out leases to tenants who have been in place, and for no other reason can they ask them to leave. Now, on top of that, you've got this delineation of broker's fees. This is gonna make it extremely difficult for owners and landlords to keep up properties and take care of repairs and maintenance on the regular basis. We do have what we call shadow inventory, which is apartments that never are hitting the market because it's actually more beneficial for the owner to take a tax loss or a tax break than renovate that unit, make it livable, and put it on the market for the amount that they mostly can put it up for. If you have a rent regulated unit as a landlord, you are 100% screwed. If you weren't already screwed before, now you're even more screwed. So let me just break this down real quick so you have a full mathing understanding of what this looks like as a landlord. If you have, let's say, 20 units, and let's just say for argument's sake, they're all being rented out at $2,500. For, let's just say you had 0 vacancies, you were able to rent it out completely and perfectly, you would have absolutely nothing to worry about because you're not paying anything additional, or maybe sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, sometimes you split it, sometimes you won't. Now, in this case, since you can no longer have that option as a landlord and you can never split it, if you had 1 vacancy in each one of those units and you had to re-rent them, but you still could rent it without any gaps, you're gonna lose $50,000 right off the top. And that $50,000 could have went to your repairs, could have went to maintenance, could have went to upkeep, could have went to something else that you now can't use it for. That's being amplified on a massive scale for these larger buildings. And who does that also affect? The tenants, because now they're no longer able to live in or find habitable, livable, safe, and clean units because these owners aren't able to take care of them. And I call this a long-term problem because it's not something that affects every single person up front. Over time, over new vacancies and new tenancies, you're just gonna see this becoming more and more of an issue. There is a slight silver lining to that. I do have a theory that is what I would describe as a caterpillar going into a cocoon type situation. That's just for some people. It's not going to be for everyone. Amongst all these negatives, I don't even know if I can call this a positive, to be honest with you, because of the way it works out, but essentially what you will have after a certain point is either owners who are so in the red that they just can't keep up anymore and they have no choice but to sell, or like you said, small unit owners that are like, it doesn't make sense to hold on to this property. So why would I keep it as a rental property if I'm not actually making money off of it? You may, down the line, have more people coming to market with more opportunities, which sounds like a win, because if more opportunities come on the market, you're gonna have more inventory, and more inventory means prices can kind of adjust on the sales level. So what we see now in New York City might end up adjusting downward, because there's gonna be all of these rundown, dilapidated, unclean units hitting the market that not anyone's going to be really excited for. It's going to be a fire sale of trash. If you could live in a 20 unit building but all the units are inside are crap, but it's selling on a discount, now you have to make the delineation for yourself. It doesn't make sense for me to buy this property, which creates huge opportunities for any major retail landlord, like or someone huge that's purchasing up these multifamilies. So that's another side problem that comes out of that. But you know, it's lower and cheaper real estate. Maybe the people who are supposed to take advantage of it will be able to take advantage of it, because larger landlords are going to want multiple unit buildings. Opportunities for tenants will become more prevalent, in the sense where units and properties that are a little bit more rundown, occasionally, or in some cases, the owners might have to co-op or condo those units. And in those circumstances, usually the offer to purchase is given up to the tenants that are living in those units first. Again, super long term. I wouldn't even say within the first year. You're going to see this years down the line if that is something that starts coming into play. So we'll have to see what happens next with everything else that comes. And that's not a guarantee at all, but I would say that's probably the best thing to look forward to if you were a tenant in this situation. I didn't want to be totally negative. I wanted to offer some aspect of positivity amongst this conversation, and that's the only little bit I can see right now. All right, let's finish strong. In this next video that I'm going to be posting in a little bit, I'm going to talk about brokers' fees in sales transactions and how the entire industry has now just gotten more transparent with the way we're doing business. So if you feel like you don't want to rent anymore, maybe you're tired of burning cash on the regular basis and you want to see what it means to actually hire a broker on your behalf for a sales transaction, this video is for you. And thank you so much for watching Easy NYC Real Estate, where I make New York real estate easy for you.